Just being in the room with somebody who chooses to start talking about their pain is incredibly powerful. And just sitting there and nodding, even if you're thinking, wow, I have no idea how to respond to this. I don't know what to say. Wow, this is quite scary stuff. This is freaking me out. Just sitting with the person and saying, I'm here with you. I'm here for you. I'm so glad that you're talking about this. Just let them talk.
That's the cool thing about being a Māori artist.
To show me that was possible. Uncle Sam voice. That I have a humble here's phone number. Although it's you'll hang on to 60 being left alone at home with gangsters. What does this mean?
Tēnā koutou e te whānau, nau mai haere mai ki te Paperback Gorillas, the podcast for mana enhancing kōrero we think is worth our time sharing and your time hearing. Ko Peter Barrett tēnei, this is Peter Barrett, and this kōrero is with Hinemoa Elder. He tōtara haimata ia, she is a leader, an expert working for our people, an author, and much more. We cover a lot in this episode. Dr. Hinemoa is a psychiatrist, so of course we talk about mental health and hauora or healing strategies, Māori trust in the health system and our vaccination rates. We talk about parenting in a healthy way and the lessons that we can learn from our tūpuna. We cover some of the impacts of knowing your history, the power of routine, and a whole lot more. We didn't get through all of the kōrero that we wanted to, but we'll be back for a second edition later on, so stay tuned for that. We did record this one during lockdown, so my kids were popping in and out to show us both their new backpacks and a couple of other treats. I left some of that kōrero in there because that's what life looks like for a lot of us right now, and it's a good marker of time, as well as a reminder that these conversations aren't only for us, and that chunks of this one especially are ultimately for our tamariki, so why would I cut them out? And like Hinemoa says later on, they're someone's tūpuna or ancestors too. This kōrero was powerful and insightful. There are many topics that are really close to my heart and which I think are important for us as Māori, us as humans as well, and some of it was pretty heavy. And I do think of this podcast as mental health mahi because, if nothing else, I want it to remind us all that we can be happy, that we can find ways to cope when it's tough, because the opposite to that being able to cope and what we're trying to cope with is ultimately mamai or pain, and at its worst, suicidality. And we touch on that a bit in this episode at a signals and prevention level. So if that's triggering for you, e te whānau, then please don't listen. But also, if like me, you worry that you're not equipped to help friends or whānau going through mental distress at that level, then please do listen. And especially for those of us still struggling through the impacts of lockdowns and COVID, kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawa nui, be strong, be brave, be steadfast. I hope you enjoy the kōrero. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Ngāti Raukawa ki te tonga, te atiawa ki whakarongotai, Ngāti toa. Ano hoki nō ku te whiwhia hoa, kei te wānanga tahi tāua, kei te whakawhiua e tahi kōrero ki te ao whānui. Ai, no te kōtua hau, no muri whenua, tēnei uri, ai, ko Hinemoa tōku.
Kia ora.
No, it's my pleasure. And as you say, sharing our thoughts and our experiences as far afield as they may reach to people that need to hear them, to invite some new reflections. Absolutely. I'm all for that. So thank you for the opportunity.
So maybe a good place to start is with the mahi that you're doing now, and with our primary kind of pātai for this kaupapa, which is around finding a place and a pathway to a life that you love, and using our mahi to do that, because we spend so much of our time doing that mahi. So yeah, are you doing the mahi that you love, and please tell us a little bit about that mahi.
Oh, fine. Short answer is yes, I am doing the mahi that I love. And the mahi that I do is I actually wear a number of different hats. So I have a number of different types of mahi, but it's really centered around oranga. And so in my Pākehā tohu, I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist. all that means, it might sound a little bit full on, but all that means is I'm a medical doctor and I'm trained to work with young people in their whānau who are experiencing a range of different kinds of distress, which impair the way that they experience the world, and they experience joy in the world and love of their own lives. So that's at the heart of what I do as what's called a clinician.
Kia ora. And I read in one of your kōrero about the impact that your mother had on that pathway of life for you. Can you tell us a little bit about that impact that she had?
For sure. So my mum was an amazing woman, a real wahine marae, and she grew up like many people's parents and grandparents with this very clear idea that being Māori was dangerous, being Māori was not acceptable, and that our parents and our grandparents were taught to extinguish or try to extinguish that part of themselves. And I witnessed her really struggle with that. And she then developed breast cancer and got really ill. And so we as a whānau got to meet a lot of medical people. And in that journey, the seed began to develop in me around noticing that she didn't ever have any Māori doctors that were looking after her. And I remember thinking, these people don't really understand Mum and understand the fact that she's Māori. Yes, she can speak great English and she can, navigate the Pākehā world, but she's not Pākehā. And so that was really my inspiration. Kia ora, honey.
Where? Is that your present? What did you just get him?
Lucky.
Because inside.
Oh, pai.
Tino pai.
Oh, pai, tō koi hoki ko te. So I was talking about Mum and her influence on me. We saw a lot of medical people, and so I started to think perhaps in a I don't know, maybe the arrogance of youth is a wonderful thing. And I thought, well, I think I might be able to, do this differently for other whānau who are Māori and who are going through difficult medical experiences. I could see the need for Māori doctors, and so that then grew and led me to apply for medical school. And that really began with this theme of, discovering lives, discovering the life that we love within us. That was a really powerful experience. I absolutely loved medical school. Every single day was a privilege. And despite the fact that, of course, there were many challenges and there was, all the sort of racism that we know and continue to fight against has been there all that time. But despite all of that, I loved it, and I knew that I was incredibly privileged to be given that opportunity.
Can you? Firstly, karohai ho. In terms of your mother passing, and I do want to come back and talk about some of those challenges that we encounter, but also that what you just said around discovering the life that we love within us. I really love that whakaaro, and I love that that kind of acknowledgement that those lives are already there within us. And if you go back, and you can think about that a bunch of different ways, but if we think about back up through our whakapapa, we've had all of this experience and these shared learnings that have been passed down to us, and these lived experiences, but that we just might not know that they're there yet, right? And we might not know those pathways are there as options. Do you think if you hadn't had that experience in the through that journey with your mother, do you think you would have found that life that you love like, was there anything there before then that led you to think that this might be something that you want to spend time doing?
So there's a number of answers to those parts. So one of the things that I recognize about myself is that I believe that I'm somebody who's grown up with a sense of possibility in every encounter, that life offers many choices and many crossroads, and that in a way, no matter which road you choose, and whichever road I've chosen, I have made lots of mistakes, and I've somehow learned from my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, something in my whakapapa, in the momo, I suspect, of our people from the far north, is that that gritty resiliency, that belief that things will unfold in the way that they're meant to, and that there will be a joy, there will be a love, there will be a purpose that will be revealed. So if mum hadn't gone through that and I hadn't decided to go to med school, I probably would have ended up working in the creative sector. I had absolutely loved music and dance and drama from a young age, and had loved the collaborative nature of those pursuits, and had, dedicated a lot of time and energy to that. And really, that's another of my happy places, if you like. So I feel confident that in a parallel universe, perhaps with other options, I would have still discovered things that made me feel good about my life and made me feel I had a contribution to make.
As part of that kind of, I guess, the output of that grit, or that the far north tenacity, being about the awareness of the ability to just enjoy your life. Like, I find that as being like that. I mean, we talk about possibilities as in possible pathways, but like the actual overarching potential to just enjoy your life, right, and just be happy, is something that can take a lot of explaining and role modeling to even make sure we're aware of, right?
I agree. And I think there is an inherent tension in modern society around doing and being. And so much emphasis is placed on the doing, the achievements, and then the kind of material possessions that are acquired and valued by that whole system of thinking and doing. And it takes a different mindset and a different kind of confidence, a different kind of sense of place in the world. And I think that's what our whakapapa is trying to tell us all the time. There is a place for you. You are here for a reason. You are representing your tupuna now. And so just sit with that, just be in that, have that sense of noho puku with that, and just see what happens. You don't always have to be fighting, out there, pushing, striving. Actually, it's a different kind of strength. It's a different kind of resilience to simply be and to enjoy that.
Kia ora. And we're, ka haere atu I te ara, but ke te pai. On that topic, and something else that I've heard you say before, and lots of our rangatira Māori say, is that there's so much mahi to do, right? Like there's a lot to do, and there's not a lot of us with the capacity or the space and headspace and all of that stuff to do some of that mahi. So on the note of what you've just been talking about, actually just being and not doing, how do you balance that? What I imagine is a bit of a constant need and a bit of a constant desire on the part of a lot of our rangatira Māori, and something that I battle with, to do the mahi, right? Like, I've got some time in my day, and I know that there's a difference that I can make, so I should use that time to do that. Is that something that you grapple with And if so, how do you balance your own health and your own wellness and your own being happy and being well?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. And I think at different ages and stages of our lives, of our developmental trajectory, we need to perhaps reclaim some of those ideas to help us be okay with, hey, you know, I'm gonna have a different level of tolerance for action and inaction and frustration and the desire to get things happening when I'm 15 compared to when I'm 25, 35, 45, 55, which is how old I am now. So, and whether we have children or we don't, whether we have a partner or we don't. So I think those real life contexts that we're all in are such an important part of being okay with wherever we're at. Because, of course, the other thing about modern society is that we are taught to sort of compare in a bad way, in a negative way. Oh, well, I'm not doing what they're doing and I should be doing more. I really hate the word should. This Pākehā word is a very, very bad word, a very unhelpful word. So I'm not sure that I've ever discovered a balance. I'm not sure if that exists. And I think maybe where I'm at now, I don't strive for whatever that might be because I'm not sure that it really exists. But other people in other settings may. I'm very driven, and when I get involved in something, I don't put the brake on. I go with that energy and that passion. And then there are times when I, you know, drop and fall flat on my face, and I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I've had it. I try not to do that sort of boom bust cycle so much. I do have some self-awareness around what my tendencies are and my personality, my character, that momo I talked about. And so I do try to keep that sort of third eye aware of where I'm at energy-wise. I do have a regular routine. I've learned that for me personally, it helps a lot. So I get up early, I'm awake. I like to wake up without an alarm. I have a really... I don't like alarms. The whole word alarm is just a horrible word, right? When you think about it, we wake up to an alarm. This is awful.
True.
I like to wake. I don't have any. I live in a place in the Ngāhere, so I don't have to have curtains on my window. So I wake up with the light, with tamanuitera, and so I wake up with the birds, and I like to just get up and get cracking, and my energy in the morning is really good. So in an ideal day, I would love to do a bit of a stretch, maybe some sort of yoga or Pilates, and a meditation. I use a Shakti mat. I find that it really works for me. I have regular things that I do every day, and that helps to ground me and helps to open up, if you like, that energy, that drive to be productive. Because, of course, we can all have lots of energy, but it doesn't necessarily go anywhere. So I want to make sure that when I have energy, that it's focused and it's delivering and it's actually helpful for people. Because I suppose I always have to keep something in the tank, especially lately, because so many people are ringing me and messaging me because they're struggling. And so I want to make sure that if somebody messages me in the middle of the night, that I'm going to be okay about that, and I'm going to be able to call on good judgment, good listening skills, so I can really be part of a solution. That probably didn't answer your question at all. But something along those lines. I don't think there's such a thing as balance. I think we all just do the best we can, and sometimes we get it wrong. I suppose that would be one of my key messages. We have to learn by making mistakes, and welcome those, and then really take the time to reflect on what the mistakes mean.
Kia ora.
I suppose one of the other things I'd say is that the thing that replenishes me, the thing that really keeps me feeling alive and that I'm living the life that I love is being connected to my whānau and seeing my kids, my wider whānau whānui, having that contact. And I've luckily enough, I have lockdown. Plenty of excitement. Okay. And so we have a great relationship. I'm lucky. I have, 2 healthy, fantastic kids, and we have a lot of fun together. So that is a source of, if you like, that is a source of balancing joy, because I love being their mum. I love being part of their lives. I love being part of my life. Just like this. Just like your kids being part of our kōrero. It's perfect. Tauira play, Nate.
I was just reflecting on my reaction to David Seymour's tweet yesterday. And so then I was thinking about a little bit more critically probably than I have been recently, but like why that trust element for us as Māori is quite tricky when it comes to the health system, and why we are, the lowest vaccinated group. And I mean, like, is it as simple as that point that you made at the start, where when you were going through that aidinga with your mama, there were no Māori doctors, right? And there wasn't any kind of acknowledgement of her being Māori. And then if somebody is coming at you from a system where we know we have been historically not treated equitably and the outcomes haven't been built equitably, then it takes a lot to regain that trust, right? But like at least being Māori is a good step towards that trust and that relationship being able to be repaired. Like, how big of a part do you think that plays in in where we're at in terms of vaccinations at the moment?
How big a part does the racism play?
Well, no, just the lack of. I mean, are we something like 4% of the GP population, right, are Māori? Like, in terms of actual people delivering the message and around vaccinations, and there to be who are Māori in the healthcare system helping our people.
Yeah. I think visibility is a key thing. The latest stats that I looked at are, I think, from 2018, and they say 3.5% of doctors in Aotearoa are Māori. That is a very low proportion from a population perspective. We're about 17%, but also from a needs perspective. So our health needs are much greater than that, because of all the things that you talked about. So really, the visibility of Māori workforce, kaimahi Māori, everywhere you go, when you are wanting to do anything related to your health, means that you're not seeing your own reality reflected. And so that's one important part, I think, of what we want to encourage is, we're all in this together. But it doesn't feel like that most of the time. When your intergenerational experience of health services, and of course health services are predicated on certain kinds of contracts, which are predicated on certain kinds of philosophies of what health is about. And so it actually calls into question much bigger issues. But the hot point right now of all of that is, it's not safe to be Māori in general healthcare services. We don't feel safe. And there's lots of indicators of that. Our life expectancy for both wahine and tāne is 7 years lower than Pākehā people. So you could say from that, from infant mortality, from all the other indices we could talk about, we've learned through that intergenerationally that it's a healthy choice to be cautious when you're interacting with a healthcare service. And then you've got the layers of what you expect, because what your cousin received, what your auntie received, what your mother received, what your grandmother received, what your great-grandmother received, what our people received in the Spanish flu in 1918 and 1919. All these memories have come back and they've been talked about, because it's not that long ago when our whānau in that time could see the government was not going to do anything to protect them. They had to try to do it for themselves. And so we've seen a reenactment of that. You know, that history is real to our whānau right now. It's not something that we think of that happened, 100 or so years ago. It's very much present. It's difficult to navigate that. And then when you have people in positions of authority using their knowledge, using their influence to essentially make sure that Māori don't get an equitable chance to be vaccinated. That is the enactment of racism, of discrimination, of that dominance and colonization right now, this week. That's colonization in action. It's not an ancient thing. It's with us every day.
Right. Kia ora. Sorry, been flip-flopping all over the place here again. But, if we could go back to the kind of the kōrero around your journey from uncovering that seed of where you wanted to make a contribution and what you wanted to do in life. What were some of those challenges that you encountered as you were setting out on that path into health?
I've talked about a few of these in other settings too. I mean, a couple of the classics were, unfortunately, sometimes people seize on these opportunities, people in positions of power and the establishment to try to find weakness, I suppose, to try to illustrate something from their perspective, their story. So when I started medical school, one of the surgeons decided that I had taken away a place from one of his sons, and so went to the papers, and so there was a story in the papers about that. In fact, different entry systems. I was in the MAPAS, the Māori and Pacific admission scheme, and this other young person was applying to come straight from school. So I wasn't taking away that person's place at all, but that would have gotten in the way of a good story, according to the people. So it did make me realize that I was stepping into a world which was highly contested and guarded by certain people who felt like that their children and their grandchildren, that was their entitlement to be part of that medical journey, to attend medical school. So that was one of the things. And I remember Dr. David Tipene Leach, one of our wonderful mentors at medical school, the chair of our Māori doctors organisation at the moment, he said to me, well, just as well you've got broad shoulders, Hinemoa. And it's such a simple statement, but it actually really helped me a lot, because what I received from what he said was, you've got this, you're going to be okay. It might feel like a lot right now, but actually, yeah, you can handle it. People made comments about, I'd worked in TV and so I must be a bimbo, whatever that means. And clearly they didn't know any of the women who work in television, because they're very smart women and they work very hard. So, I mean, all these weird kind of judgments were used at times. And yeah, it's disheartening, isn't it? I suppose, yeah, there were times when it got me down and I thought, but it never dissuaded me from my path. I was sad for people who didn't know me and who had those projections about me. But it didn't stop me working really hard to to pass all my exams. I had young children. I didn't want to have to repeat anything.
Kia ora. And we're lucky for that, right? But then again, I guess like something that you kind of mentioned, like you're aware of that grit and that probably that persistence and that tenacity that you obviously have to make it through those challenges. But like how many of us don't have that, right? And actually stop, set off on that path and then go, oh, actually, like I don't have the headspace to fight and to exhaust myself pushing through those challenges, plus just the regular old challenge of study and setting out on what is already a daunting pathway. So kia ora for pushing through.
Kept me going was our whānau at the medical school, our whānau of students, and that sense of the vertical whānau, because we had our tuakana who were already further down the track, and they were very, very supportive of us and always there for us. And they sort of handed the baton on to us and we handed it through and were there for the ones coming after us. So there was the real sense of lineage, whakapapa, if you will. That was an essential component. And so that's, I know, what we all try to contribute to in a myriad of different ways now, is to look after, to support, to tautoko our Māori medical students in particular, because we've been there, we know what it's like. And we also sadly know that not much has changed in terms of the racism that our Māori medical students face.
What would you say today to, having gone through that, to those who disagree with the need for a pathway, for a Māori medical student quota or whatever whatever it's called, a pathway?
Yeah, that sort of affirmative action is critical. Well, if we hadn't had that structure, if we hadn't had that mechanism, we'd have even fewer Māori doctors than we have now. And as I said before, about 3.5%. The statistics are a few years old, but it's not going to have changed dramatically in the last 3 years. So we still have a very small proportion of Māori doctors compared to the need. And without that affirmative action, we'd have very, very few. That would not serve the needs of our community at all. So I think we have some practical, hard evidence that those programs are absolutely necessary.
In your day-to-day mahi and we talked about doing versus being, but in the doing that you do, how much of a part do you think the feedback loop of you doing the mahi that you do well and making a difference contributes to your confidence to carry on that pathway? And I guess I'm asking that from the perspective of what we've just talked about. So for those who are starting off in that path who might not have yet had that confidence, how much and how much work do we need to do, and how do we do that work to build that confidence, so that others have the same, do the same, carry on the same struggle that you have and walk that path in the face of those challenges. Sorry, that's a long-winded part though.
I think what you're asking me is about this interface between, the doing the mahi that we love and how that then feeds back to enhancing and expanding a sense of confidence, and then we can share more about that. And that certainly has been my experience. I mean, there's some evidence that, you need to do something for about 10 years before you get really good at it. And there's definitely something in that. Turning up and seeing whānau and being there for whānau every day. The whānau that I have worked with are my greatest teachers. And I'll often say to whānau now, what I've learned from my whānau that I've worked with in the past is these are the things that are likely to be really helpful. Because unfortunately it's difficult in certain situations in what are called mental health services, which are also really about mental illness services, but that's another kaupapa. It's hard sometimes to link people up so that they have that peer support, even though we know that peer support is really fantastic and evidence-based, because peers can have different kinds of conversations than professionals like me. No matter how I present myself, I am still in the role of the specialist. Whereas a peer who's actually walked in the same shoes is going to connect with a tūroro, with a patient in a different way. And so why I'm sharing that is that I suppose I'm trying in those conversations where I can't actually bring a peer into a room and say, hey, you guys, please get to know each other and talk and share, because that's a healing journey in itself. In the absence of being able to do that, I'm trying to be the conduit of that, of just some tiny nuggets of that wisdom that have been passed on to me from other whānau who've been through a similar thing. So I can stand in that confidence of the knowledge that I've seen in practice, that those whānau have used in their lives, that has worked for them, to then offer that alongside a whole lot of other stuff, to offer that special rongoā, really, in a confident way. So that's just one example of how the ongoing practice of anything feeds the confidence of how you talk about it, how you communicate what works. And that's a key thing. As a doctor, I'm a practitioner. I'm interested in things that are going to work. All the things that I've done in my career, my research, is all about things that will actually make a difference in people's lives on a daily basis. I'm not somebody who has been involved in learning about things for learning's sake. And that has its place. We need people who are deep thinkers, who will explore the philosophical aspects. That's really important. I'm not necessarily in my heart that person. I'm about finding some tools that are meaningful. And the more that I do what I do, the more that it does come down to some pretty simple things. Whakawhanaungatanga is critical. The hononga, the connectivity, and the wairua within that, the wairua that's strengthened within that intuition, that thing that you feel in the pit of your gut, this person gets me, or this person doesn't really get me. Those are some of the things that I noticed way back at the beginning when Mum was sick. There wasn't anybody around her, Māori, who really got her at that level. So I suppose that's something that I've kind of come full circle around that. I've really been taught by my patients and their whānau that if you haven't got that cultural connectivity, you've got nothing.
Kia ora. Our last real pātai about your kind of haringa and your journey into this life that you love. And you kind of touched on it a little bit already, but if you imagine there's a parallel universe where you didn't find the pathway to this life that you love, or maybe even where you didn't find a pathway to a life that you love. So if we think about, like, you also didn't land in this other planet where you are a full-time practitioner of the arts, or you're only writing books that Oprah loves, or you're only doing theatre or whatever it might be, voice acting. What is it that you and I do want to come back about what was that like with Oprah, but what is it that stopped you in that parallel universe, you think, from finding your life that you love, whatever it is?
See, I really struggle with believing that that parallel universe exists. That is not in my nature. I am a person who is full of belief in a positive outcome. And I suppose, in a way of just thinking about that, it's good that I work in the way that I do as a psychiatrist, because a lot of the people that I see, people in trouble with the law, people who have such complex backgrounds intergenerationally, many people have kind of stopped believing that they can find a way to heal. And so I don't have that barrier inside me. I'm always looking for creative options and possibilities. So I can't even imagine a parallel universe where I haven't discovered a life that I love. When I think about the possible barriers for anyone to discovering a life that they love, those barriers coming from the field that I'm in are really around overwhelming trauma, overwhelming intergenerational trauma, violence, sexual violence, being controlled by others, being stripped of a sense of humanity and human dignity by others. And unfortunately, there are people who've experienced that in their lives. And for them, it is incredibly hard to find pathways where they can find a life that they love. And that's a big part of why I do what I do, because I want to be part of that hard journey with them. Sadly, we have a society where we still victim blame. We still have all these other layers of attribution of responsibility of the harm onto the victim. And so there are so many layers for people who've lived through those sorts of lives and whose whānau have lived through those sorts of lives to discover a different kind of a narrative that is true for them. So long story short, I don't believe in a parallel universe where people can't have a life that they love, but I do see in my work some of the big ticket barriers that occur that can really get in the way of that.
Kia ora. Why do you think you don't believe in it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Something about my parents, my grandparents, my tupuna, there is this momo, when I think about conversations I've had with my cousins in Aupōuri, nei takoto, we are the survivors of some, pretty harsh situations, and there are so many amazing stories of resilience from our old people. But of course, then there are other people in the wider iwi who don't somehow feel that they can access that. And maybe it's people who don't feel entitled because they have this idea that they're not Māori enough, or other reasons that restrict their sense of being allowed into that world. So anything that I can do to remind people or highlight to people, look, that world's just waiting for you all the time. It's available to you, no matter how whakamā you might feel, or shy or awkward, or whatever the fear is that is stopping you from stepping into that room. That is your room. That is the lounge of your house. That is your whare, just waiting for you. So it's hard to know where that sort of stubborn quality comes from. But I am a bit of a dog with a bone with the old belief about and hope, I suppose, that there's always a way.
Kia ora. Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of kaupapa that I think about a little bit, and I think I reckon you're right, and I mean, here's me talking to you saying I reckon you're right about anything to do with thinking. If I think about my like what you're saying about that access to, and that your mama and your parents and your tupuna, maybe a part of it is just knowing that history and potential and that ability is there in your whakapapa, right? Like I think about my mum and dad, and when I was growing up, my two tuahine and the photo behind me there passed away when they were 6 and 8, and so I watched my mum and dad kind of live with that, and obviously they still live with it, but live with that and carry on, really with this incredible spirit and this incredible resilience. And so I had, I've got really close access to that. I know that that's a possibility, that it is possible to carry on and enjoy your life in the face of stuff. And I actually didn't. Probably one of the most traumatic things in my life was a car accident that I had when I was 21, and the wahine in the car which I hit, called Lorna, passed away in that accident. And so I had to face into that, but I had this access to the knowledge that, like, mum and dad could live through that, and so I can live through this and carry on and actually try to be happy and believe that I can be happy, and so that access was really nearby. Whereas I guess if we have to go 5 or 6 layers back into our whakapapa and we're not familiar with that whakapapa, we don't know the stories of our tupuna who have done these incredible things, then like you say, that connection isn't there, right? It's a different, it's a much harder quest to find that belief, maybe.
Yes, and that's one of the deliberate ploys of colonisation, of course, is to sever those ties. And so that's why it's so important that we do teach the real history of Aotearoa in schools, because that in itself, to me, is a hauora intervention. That is a healing intervention, because, for one thing, all of us as Māori have access more broadly to those stories. To those stories of resilience, of loss and grief and tragedy and horror, and how and so we learn through the story, and we put ourselves in the shoes of those in the story, and we can more easily put ourselves in the shoes of the people when we know that we're related to the people, because they are us and we are them much more clearly. And then you're actually building a visceral experience, a real biofeedback system experience within the physiology of the tamariki, the rangatahi, around, wow, that's horrifying, that's awful, all the emotions, and this is how the people survived. And this is how they managed to claw their way back, or however they managed that. So it reminds people, it reminds all of us that we can draw on those lessons of our old people, of our tupuna, in the now. And like you say, I'm so karohai, I'm so sorry to hear about all those things. That's incredibly sad and tough. And exactly in the way that you've described, wouldn't we want that kind of story of resilience to be available to all of our tamariki mapuna? Because let's face it, our children are much more likely to be growing up in poverty with difficulties. That's no choice of their own, and it's not their parents' fault either. We're not beating up on our whānau, on our mātua, because it's not their fault either. It's not about that. So I think it comes back to how these systems need to change. These are all mental health interventions, but of course we don't think about them like that.
Kia ora.
And now for a word from our sponsors.
Paperback Gorillas is brought to you by Kapiti Island Honey, the finest honey on the... We're not really sponsored. Kapiti Island Honey is just the koha we send out to our manuhiri to say thank you for their time in Māori. We spend our time and energy on this kaupapa because we believe it's worth it in order to share these kōrero, these conversations and learnings with you. But aside from those hours that we spend, it does also cost money, especially as more and more of these conversations have to happen remotely. Not many of the tools that work well are free. But again, we spend that money because we think it's worth it. If you're enjoying this episode or any of the others and you think they're worth the time and money, then please visit our Patreon page and look at how you can help out. By becoming a patron, you'll get exclusive access to a whole bunch of extra content, including one of my favorites, which is the breakdown and lessons or learnings that I've had from each of these kōrero, which I take time to write out after each episode. You'll have a chance to suggest manuhiri or guests and a whole lot more. But most importantly, you'll be helping keep this kaupapa alive. And you can do that by visiting patreon.com/paperbackgorillas. That's patreon.com/paperbackgorillas. The link is in the show description. There are $2 options, $5 options, and every bit of help means that we're paying less out of our own pocket to share these learnings with you. This is also the part of the show where I say thank you to our Paperback Gorilla patron whānau who are already doing that. So Atawhai, Anaru, Anna, Arama and Lincoln, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. A massive thank you to all of you for your support, your belief in the kaupapa. We wouldn't be online if it wasn't for you. Kia ora. Diving a bit more into the detail of your mātauranga, why is talking about our mamae useful? Why is it so important to our mental health? And I say that having experienced that and doing that myself often and quite proactively through music and through writing and through other mechanisms. So I know that it's really powerful and useful and beneficial. Why is it so useful, and how do we encourage that amongst those who are at a point where they're ready to do that?
Yeah, look, the pātai rangatira, I think part of the why, there are so many things that I want to say about this. Communicating our pain, our suffering, our grief, our loss does a number of things, in that it creates a normalization, it creates a shared experience with somebody else and with ourselves. So for a lot of people I work with, they're often saying words out loud that they've never heard themselves say before. And I often say to parents, as parents can be a bit shocked about the words that come out of their children's mouths, right? And so I'm often saying to parents, well, let's just remember that this young person hasn't rehearsed this. These are words coming out of their mouth on the back of feelings, on the back of a whole lot of stuff that's probably been locked up in there for a while, and it's pouring out. And let's just let it wash over us and remember that they're hearing these things for the first time too. So the listening part is also critical for the person speaking and listening to themselves, and for the people around that are listening and bearing witness. And I think that's another part, just being in the room with somebody who chooses to start talking about their pain is incredibly powerful. And just sitting there and nodding, even if you're thinking, wow, I have no idea how to respond to this. I don't know what to say. Wow, this is quite scary stuff. This is freaking me out. Just sitting with the person and saying, I'm here with you. I'm here for you. I'm so glad that you're talking about this. Just let them talk. We know that in our society, especially in Aotearoa, we have a lot of, the backstory of our country, the sort of man against nature, man alone. Our archetypes for our men, our narratives for our men are about not showing emotion because that's weakness. The strong silent type, the southern man, all of these stereotypes have a grain of truth, right? And so particularly for our tāne and helping our young boys to see that, yes, dad has a tangi, or dad can show gentleness, and dad can show his humour and his fun and his caring and all those beautiful ways that maybe aren't part of a traditional Kiwi male stereotype. And I know that for our tāne in the Māori society, in our Māori world, there's a fair amount of that too, in our own unique way. So talking and listening, sharing, seeing how people want to tell the story of their life, the story of their pain, because there are insights that come with that. As people tell that story, they, pennies drop. People start saying things, and then they might say, oh, I've just realized that there's a connection between these things, and this is why I was so hurt by that experience. Or, this is why I was so desperate and full of anguish because of these other experiences. So people start to weave those connections together, and it builds insight, it builds a sense of meaning. That connectivity amongst the thinking, amongst the words, amongst the whakaaro, this is a healing in itself.
Kia ora. Talking about healing, the suicide prevention strategy, which I think you played a part in.
I have over the years had been part of various groups, and I'm currently chairing the Māori Expert Advisory panel to the Suicide Prevention Office, which is quite a new configuration of the way things are done at the Ministry of Health.
Cool. And so in there's kōrero about enabling our whānau and families and community members when they're experiencing suicidal distress. So, and this is something that, we kind of potentially touched on it a little bit earlier as well, but what are those signs of distress that we can be looking for in our whānau, so that we actually, know when we should be doing something, whatever that might be, and that's a whole nother pātai and a whole nother kōrero. But firstly, what signs should we actually be looking out for?
Yeah, so I think the way that I approach this sort of question is to think about building strong relationships first. So obviously we want to work to prevent people feeling suicidal in the first place. And so that's all the things that foster strong relationships. And we all, in all whānau, we have fights, we have fallings out, we have the whole gamut of things, but at the core, the whāriki of the whānau is the thing that we want to be strengthening. And then, I think we just got to be careful about how we position our thinking around this, because there can be a tendency to rattle off, well, these are all the kinds of symptoms of mental illness, and if we look out for those, then we are, and that is in a way that has its place. It's a sort of necessary but not sufficient response, because many people who become suicidal don't have a mental illness. Suicidality is a thing that hunts with the pack of poverty and food insecurity and lack of opportunity and poverty of thinking and poverty of resources. So I want to make sure that we remember that people who are under pressure are at higher risk of thinking about suicide. I suppose the key things that I wanted to say were around look out for people who you notice a kind of disconnect between maybe an overcompensatory brave face, people who are putting on a bit of an act about being okay. And I think most of us are pretty good at noticing that and thinking, oh, that's slightly there's a slight air of that being constructed, being curated for my benefit. What's really going on? So one of the things I say a lot to people in my whānau, in my friend circle, and to my patients in their whānaus, I say, I get the feeling that you're pretty good at putting on a brave face. And so what's really going on underneath that? I mean, we all, and normalizing it, of course we all do it. We all do it. And to say, but what's really going on? I know you're telling me you're fine, but it's just not what I'm feeling in my puku right now. So when we get that feeling of the disconnect between the mismatch between what's on the surface and the sort of vibe we're getting from the person, I think that's a really important one. When people are withdrawing from the things that they normally do, if you're normally getting a phone call from somebody, or you're phoning somebody and they're answering their phone, emails, FaceTime, especially at the moment with the different lockdowns and the uncertainty, if there's a bit of a withdrawal, that's definitely something to follow up with. And the other big thing is substance abuse. When people start using, and they might be quite secretive about it, they might be pretty sneaky about it, we know that many people who become suicidal and then become dangerously suicidal they're not sober. So when people are using substances, cannabis, alcohol's a big one. It really disinhibits all of us. So we know that's one of the reasons we drink alcohol, because we like a little bit of disinhibition. We get anxious about going out and hanging out with people. So we have some drinks. We feel a bit more confident. We're all in that. We're all the same in that regard. But it really does switch off the frontal lobes of the brain. And so your planning and your judgment is really distorted. And so that is a risk factor for people who are feeling in pain, feeling distressed, maybe having some suicidal thoughts. That's the thing to really pay attention to and do something about in an urgent way, when people are becoming intoxicated and they're very distressed, or they might even start talking about suicide.
Can you talk to us then now about about holistic thinking and the mental health system? What state is it in now? What's working, and what's not working? What could be better?
Okay, so in a nutshell, we do have a fundamental problem in that we still organise our services, as I alluded to before. The contracts, the philosophical approach is a mind-body split one. If you think about a hospital campus near where you live, there'll be the main hospital, and then somewhere down the back there'll be a mental health unit hidden away, hard to find sometimes. And so that's how our services are configured spatially, and often that's how we think about them and notice them. Of course, that is not how people live. We live with all these things wrapped up together. And in fact, we know in medicine that mental health, the neuropsycho-immunological aspects of health are intertwined. But we do continue to perpetuate this falsehood that there's the mind stuff and there's the body stuff, and they're quite separate. So that's a problem. And even with whare tapawha, I think people forget about the whare. We think about the whā, nā mea e whā, nā tapa e whā, the four walls, but we forget that this is actually a united whare, and it sits on a whenua, and it has its own history, it has its own whakapapa. So I think that's a fundamental problem that gets in the way. Of course, many of us are approaching our work in a holistic manner, but the system itself is not set up in that way. So that's a problem that could be changed for the better. In accepting and putting into practice a more holistic approach is definitely going to be more meaningful to our Māori whānau who need that kind of support.
Kia ora. On that need for support, we know that as Māori we have we have entirely different outcomes to non-Māori, right? And there's a bunch of reasons for that. Do you think any of that, the loss that we have, so we talked about whanaungatanga and that need for the hononga and the connection, and our memory of that, right? Like in our bones, we remember what that was like because we know how, we strive towards and we grab it when it's there. How big a part do you think the loss of that hapu living and that living as iwi has had, and that loss of connection that was once so normal for us, does that have anything to do with our current health stats and the challenges that we face sometimes as a people?
Mm. Oh, absolutely. So just to take one example, which is a telling one for me, we know that the way that we brought up our tamariki back in the day, which is a small number of tamariki growing up with a large group of whānau around, that is ideal. That is an ideal way for our tamariki to grow. And international experts from all cultures recognise this. They recognise what our ancestors knew very well. So that the fact that has been eroded and that we are now, for the most part, many of us, not all of us, some people are lucky enough to carry on living in that way of time immemorial, and that is very, very healthy. But people are continuing to come, and we know all around the world, people are continuing to come and live in cities, and cities are not set up like that. So they tend to have childcare arrangements where there are large numbers of children and small numbers of adults. So that's absolutely found the wrong way in terms of what we know about brain development, psychosocial, emotional development of our tamariki mokopuna. So just from that perspective alone, and many of us, certainly developmental doctors like myself, would argue strongly, when you get that part right, and you get the parenting part right, and you're looking after our mamas and our papas and the mental health issues there, and we know that there are huge problems with suicidality and completed suicide for our young Māori mums, that restoring those means of living, so that the restoration of papakainga is about oranga. It is about intergenerational hauora, because that's going to promote much better brain development, emotional development, connectivity, whanaungatanga, all of those things, resilience, making sure everyone will know the stories and the histories. It creates an environment for all of those things to happen and to be reclaimed in healthy ways. So I absolutely agree with, I think, what you're inviting me to talk about around haputanga, which is communal living, collective ways of thinking about our identity are at the centre of our well-being.
And I think even at the even on a smaller scale than that, like it's got to be one of the most ridiculous things ridiculous paths that we've set out on, which is that one of, in Western society, we think, we should all be working, we should all be doing this 9 to 5, and working hard, and the harder you work at your 9 to 5, the more successful you are as a person. But also, like, we should also raise these children, and like, let's have 3 or 4 children, like we might have used to in the day. But even like the generation before mine, where like mum didn't work all the time, but dad did. So we had at least one parent there who could even facilitate some of that hononga and some of that haputanga in Otaki, where we could actually do some of that stuff. But now we go, like, let's live out in the city and let's all work and let's all carry on raising children while we're at work somehow, without that connection. Like, it's just bananas. Is there anything that you think we could do better when it comes to raising tamariki to have the independence they need to go out into te ao, but still have the balance right? And the selfish part here is papa of a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, but still give them that love and that smothering that I want to give them, without making them smothered.
Yeah, look, I think this is a really interesting question, isn't it? The interplay and the tension sometimes between independence and interdependence. And so my take on it is, look, our tupuna weren't anti-independence. Many of them were incredibly independent, rule-breaking, mischief-making characters. And they were also deeply embedded in an interdependent identity and way of living. So how to foster the best of all of that for our generation, our children and generations to come? Yeah, it's not easy. And so I think first thing I'd say is, as modern day parents, we have to give ourselves some slack and be okay about getting it wrong sometimes, or not getting it perfect. I think there is this idea about some kind of perfect parenting. It just doesn't exist. Trying our best, weighing things up, talking with other pakeke, other mātua that we know, sharing, thinking about, well, how do we, the connectivity is the juice of it, I feel, is the fuel. Without the connectivity, without that real kind of operationalizing of the interdependence, then independent activity can just sort of lead them off into their own path, and there's no way to kind of pull them back and have them reflect on, well, what about that was working for you and what about that was a bit off the rails perhaps. So starting with the bedrock of the connectivity, all the things that feed that, all the things that strengthen that, which is like day after day of ordinary whānau life. You know, ordinary whānau life might feel like it's boring or it's humdrum or it's just so normal, but hey, this is the meat and potatoes part. This is it's quantity, not quality. You know, many of us were told back in the day, quality time is what it's all about. That is complete rubbish. Quantity is everything. So being there with the tamariki day after day after day, being predictable parents, turning up, them knowing that you're going to turn up. These are the critical things. And then from that basis, when our tamariki will naturally, because life makes us all like this, naturally want to try things by themselves. They learn, they learn to walk and go to the toilet and talk and all those things quite independently, but with a context around those learnings. So I don't have any paint by numbers solution to that. It is very much a learning as you go for the whole whānau, especially for the parents. But I think trying not to be perfect and having some good self-awareness around that and learning by when things don't go quite according to plan and just spending day after day as much time as you can with your kids, that's the crucial part.
Kia ora. And lastly, because I know you have to go, I loved something that you said somewhere about treating our children like the tupuna that they will become. I'd love to hear a little bit more of your whakaaro on that, and also about the can we apply that same concept to ourselves, and is that a valuable thing to do?
Oh, kapai. I do think I've seen this work in my practice, in my work, this idea that we can offer to ourselves, to our tamariki, hey, we are all tupuna. We are all tupuna of the future. And in some iwi, for example, in the north, we actually use that kupu for people who are alive, who are grandparents. We call them tupuna. I know it's not the same as that all around the country. But I do see it being really, really positive in that it just opens up a whole different way of thinking. Often when whānau are feeling quite almost trapped, that they don't have enough resources, that they're feeling bereft or they just don't know what to do with parenting their tamariki mokopuna, and to say, hang on, well, this is a tupuna, this is a tupuna and you're a tupuna too. And one day somebody's going to say, oh, that was my great-great-grandfather, or that was my great-great-auntie. And that's you. And that's your baby right now. So how does this change our sense of feeling resourced and resourceful and having energy for this? And it does unleash a different kind of vibe, a different kind of excitement. And there's one thing I know that is so healing for our whānau. It's when they start to delight, when we delight in our tamariki, when we actually just go, oh my God, I love you. You're incredible. Look at you doing that. Wow. I love the way you did that without me asking you to, stuff like that. So I think the tupuna factor releases this joy, this delight, and a sense of legacy, and a sense of, wow, we better, take a lot of care here because this is a tupuna. We really want to. It brings forward a real sense of commitment to doing things right and to trying our best. When people feel exhausted or a bit, over it, or they are struggling to find good things to say about their tamariki, which, in my job is not an uncommon thing to hear from our whānau. So when people are feeling a bit like glass half empty, I offer these ideas, and it does seem to be helpful for everybody, not only the tamariki, right? The matu as well.
Kia ora. And actually, I mean, something that I've seen more and more on LinkedIn actually popping up, a hashtag of be a good ancestor, which is the same thing, right? It's thinking about that. What is the long-term impact that I'm having here, and what perspective am I thinking about this thing here within, which is always good, right? I mean, I think that perspective thinking is probably, aside, alongside that, I was saying that connection, or that access to the examples that I've had of my mum and dad, that perspective, being able to think in perspective is probably one of the best tools that I've got in my kete, which again I think comes from mum and dad and through a bunch of different things. But yeah, Eho, I know you have to go.
I'll share one whakapapa from my book.
Yes, please.
And it really is very much in the theme of what we've just been talking about, which is I wanted to write a whakatauki, a whakatauaki at the end of my book, and I was lucky enough to go to Antarctica a couple of years ago. So I waited till I was in Antarctica, and I learned about our ancestors who had been there in the 7th century. Hui te rangiora was one. And so what I wrote was Te Rerenga o Hui te rangiora, the journey of Hui te rangiora, follow in the footsteps of our ancestors. That's a way that we can be well. That's a way that our planet can be well. So I think that, following in our ancestors' footsteps, drawing on the beautiful wisdom, the often pretty challenging wisdom of our tupuna and held within whakatauaki, is a real source of strength and provides that impetus to carry on, to keep believing, to keep holding that hope alive, and to see those possibilities. So, I think that's probably a fitting way for me to whakakapi kōrero.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Thank you again for your time. I mean, so many taonga in there, and so many really important reminders and learnings for me, as well as I'm sure some of our listeners as well. Very personal reminders in there, and I'm sure they'll be as personal for our listeners too. Thank you again for all of your mahi and the work that you do for us, and for being one of those faces who we can trust, and voices who we can trust in the system, and a reminder that there are actually ways that we can work within the system to make it work for us, and to change it when we need to as well, because without you doing your mahi, it can be hard for us to see that. So thank you. And also, of course, if you haven't already, check out the book Aroha. He tino taonga tēnei. I've got my ebook copy. I'll just show off while I'm here. I don't have a big giant TV, but I've got the biggest screen e-reader out of anybody I know. Well, that's us, te whānau. Thanks for stopping by, and we hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode of Paperback Gorillas as much as we enjoyed having the kōrero. Most importantly, we hope there was something in there for you of value to put into your kete and take away. Don't forget to hit subscribe on your podcast app or Spotify or wherever you're listening. Follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/paperbackgorillas, and check out paperbackgorillas.co.nz for videos and news about upcoming episodes. And while you're here, just another plug, patreon.com/paperbackgorillas. That's patreon.com/paperbackgorillas. Show us some love, tautoko, some support, and help us keep the lights on and help keep the podcast ad-free. Kia ora.